Angie Draculets, Editorial Director of Biopharm International, and I'm here today with Mike Clayman, CEO of Flexion Therapeutics. Based in Woburn, Massachusetts, Flexion works to develop therapeutics for musculoskeletal disorders. Thank you, Mike, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angie.
Can you provide us with a brief background on the company and its focus?
Sure. So Flexion was founded in late 2007 with the idea of rapidly progressing compounds in the clinic to meaningful proof of concept. And we've evolved our approach to focus on therapies at this point for osteoarthritis, and in particular, therapies that are injected within the joint, so-called intra-articular treatments, using a sustained release format to allow the drug to persist in the joint as long as possible to affect a good therapeutic outcome while also being associated with vanishingly low systemic concentrations. And Andy, I'd love to, with your agreement, just pull up here for a second and just talk for a minute about osteoarthritis and maybe provide a frame for the discussion.
Sure.
So the osteoarthritis is a degenerative joint disease of epidemic proportions. It affects over 100 million people worldwide in terms of symptomatic disease, over 27 million in the U.S., and Flexion's initial approach is to treat patients with osteoarthritis of the knee, which is the most commonly injected joint, and there are over 10 million patients with knee osteoarthritis in the U.S. The prevalence, which is already quite substantial, is actually growing in light of an aging population, an increasingly obese population, and also driven by sports injuries. If you tear your anterior cruciate ligament as a young athlete, you have a 60% chance of developing osteoarthritis in the next 10 to 15 years. And what drew us to this field was the recognition that the current osteoarthritis treatments are simply inadequate. Oral therapies provide limited pain relief and are associated with serious organ toxicities, including black box warnings for same and occasionally fatal reactions. And the current intra-articular therapies, which are steroids as a class and hyaluronic acids, a lubricant as a class, either provide pain relief of inadequate duration or inadequate magnitude. Yet the intra-articular therapies generate well over $1.5 billion a year worldwide in sales. And when we put this scenario together, we said to ourselves, this is a space that is ripe for innovation. This is a substantial and growing unmet medical need, and we came to believe that our approach, the sustained release intra-articular approach, had the potential to provide real and meaningful benefits for patients in need.
Thank you for giving us that background, and I'm glad you brought up osteoarthritis. Flexion has been successful by focusing on the intra-articular treatment for that disease by targeting a full range of treatments for osteoarthritis. Can you talk about why Flexion took that particular approach and how it's been working to date?
Sure. So we believe that if we were going to be in this space, we needed to have a critical mass of product opportunities, novel product opportunities to advance to meaningful proof of concept and ultimately to registration and launch. And we had in-licensed a sustained release P38 inhibitor from AstraZeneca as one of our initial products when we first started out at Flexion, and that became the nucleating asset, if you will, for our portfolio that now includes a sustained release steroid, triamcinolone acetonide, and sustained release TrkA antagonist, TrkA being the receptor for nerve growth factor. And what we like about this portfolio is, as you look at it, assuming that we generate the data that we hope to in terms of efficacy and safety, the sustained-release steroid could be positioned as a near frontline therapy. The sustained-release P38 inhibitor for patients who progress to needing something beyond steroids, and the sustained-release TrkA antagonist for patients with end-stage disease who have pain refractory to any other analgesic approaches. So we have in our portfolio a spectrum of treatments that have the potential to address the entire set of patient needs in osteoarthritis in terms of pain relief. The other thing that we like about our portfolio is that both the sustained-release P38 inhibitor and the sustained-release steroid have the potential to be disease-modifying. And while we will drive hard to registration and launch on improved magnitude and duration of pain relief, we will in time pursue the potential for these therapies to also be disease-modifying, which is an enormous unmet medical need in osteoarthritis, because the natural history of this disease is eventually, for many patients, to require joint replacement when their pain gets to the point of no longer being responsive to available analgesic therapies. It's the next step to relieve pain and improve function is joint replacement, and there'll be over 1 million total knee replacements in the U.S. within the coming years, and we're hopeful that our approaches have the potential to make a difference in that regard.
And with those changes, I imagine that the company's corporate strategy has had to evolve and change a little bit over the years. Is that the case?
That's absolutely the case, and our current strategy has us pursuing commercialization of our products in the U.S. and partnering outside the U.S. And we did this very thoughtfully and after a lot of research and reflection. And what drew us to the potential for launching our products in the U.S. was a recognition that other companies selling hyaluronic acid products, in one case, sell as much as $400 million of their hyaluronic acid with a sales force of fewer than 100 individuals in the U.S. And we think that's the kind of value proposition that is credible and attractive for a small company like Flexion.
Okay. You started to mention a couple little challenges there, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. What major challenges did Flexion run into when developing a pipeline of drugs for the treatment of this full range of a disease?
Well, I'd say that we effected a transition in our strategy. Our original strategy, the co-founder of Flexion with me, is Dr. Neil Bodick, and two of us spent a number of years at Lilly, and the last several years of our time there running a component of Lilly Research Labs called Chorus. And the original idea for Flexion was to take attractive assets from large pharma that were not being adequately progressed by the sponsors, and taking those and efficiently and rapidly and safely progressing them to meaningful proof of concept, with the idea that those would then be attractive to either the original sponsors or other large pharma companies. We would partner those assets or sell those assets and then continue the process of bringing in other assets to do the same thing. We took a step back and wondered about the validity of a strategy that had us monetizing assets at proof of concept, increasingly aware that large pharma was doing more and more option-based deals with very modest upfronts and a lot of downstream milestones and royalties where the risk was borne by the company, by the small company. And alternatively, saying the large pharma might say to a company like Flexion, very interesting proof of concept data, why don't you generate the phase 2B dose ranging study data and get back to us. And that's really not a great position for a small company like Flexion to be in. And so we took a step back. We had already in-licensed 5 assets. One of those was the P38 inhibitor for osteoarthritis. We saw the potential to go it alone in the intra-articular for osteoarthritis space, using that P38 inhibitor as a nucleating asset, and we thought the go-it-alone strategy really had even more to commend it than the original strategy. So we effected a shift from what we had started out with to a focus on osteoarthritis and particularly intra-articular therapies for osteoarthritis. And once we made that switch, Angie, we, I think, had a very clear set of directions, and we were fortunate enough to originate the sustained-release steroid ourselves and build strong IP around that, and then to in-license the TrkA antagonist, as it happens, also from AstraZeneca. Important to point out that both of the in-licensed assets from AstraZeneca are ours to commercialize without restriction as we feel appropriate. So we've created a critical mass of high-quality assets in the portfolio. So the construction of the portfolio, once we all agreed amongst the management team and the board that moving in the direction of intra-articular therapy for osteoarthritis was right, I'd say we moved quite efficiently to construct a highly attractive portfolio of opportunities there.
Great. Some other companies may be trying to take a similar strategic approach within a different therapeutic area. Can you offer any best practices for companies starting down that path?
I'd say this with all due humility. We are a work in progress. So I don't know that we yet have generated the data to say that we can provide advice to others. We feel very good about where we are. I can tell you, Andy, that there are many companies out there who continue to adhere to the proof of concept model. That was our original model, and I think that time will tell whether that model will be as successful as we originally thought it would be, and as a number of companies currently do. I can tell you that it's an easier story to tell as a small company, be concentrated in a therapeutic area, and we're building deep expertise in that area, so that as we're generating our clinical data, designing our clinical trials, building a network of expert consultants, interacting with regulators, we're building that all off of a base of deepening understanding and knowledge in osteoarthritis, and I find that very appealing. So without answering your question necessarily, I like where we are, but I think it's too early to say that this is absolutely the only way to go. So we'll see.
Right.
Time will tell.
I appreciate your
openness point out,
on that.
Yeah, surely. Just to point out a couple of things about the portfolio. We are excited about the fact that we are in the clinic, and we'll have defining clinical data for our P38 inhibitor in the second quarter of this year, so next quarter, and that our sustained-release steroid will be entering the clinic sometime this year, and will be generating its defining data thereafter. So we're moving things along, and we are confident that we're designing the right clinical trials that will generate the data that will clearly define the opportunity for these assets.
Right, you definitely have a very specific approach, and I imagine at least on the management side, being open and flexible is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also true that we're pretty good at knowing what we don't know, so we're very open to learning and very open to accessing the best expertise in the world to help us be as effective as we need to be as a company. Having said that, we very purposefully, and I do think this is a strategy. We've very purposefully kept ourselves very small. We've hired what I think is an outstanding, frankly, the best development team I've ever been associated with, an outstanding development team at Flexion. The entire Flexion employee base is 10. And we will grow very judiciously in the face of positive data as appropriate thereafter. But the idea is that with the right depth of expertise and the ability to access external expertise, you can do a lot with a small number of staff and management. And so to be managing a portfolio of 3 assets with an employee base of 10, that includes that basically is 6 people in the development organization and then a handful of others who are outside of development, I think is a reasonably efficient way to approach things, and something that to date has worked well for us.
That's good to hear. You did mention a second quarter project. I was wondering if you could speak to Flexion's goals for the year ahead, and also even looking further into the future where you see the company and similar companies, say, 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, so we will, as I mentioned, have defining clinical data for our most advanced product, the P38 inhibitor, in the second quarter, and we'll initiate the clinical trial work for our sustained-release steroid later this year. So those are 2 very important milestones, the availability of the clinical data for the first and the initiation of defining clinical study for the second. So those are 2 major milestones for us. We have, given our strategy to partner externally, we are in active discussions with partners literally around the world around specific assets and around the portfolio. So we see the coming number of months as having the potential to actually affect a number of partnerships. And in terms of financing, we are well financed through the beginning of 2013, and we will pursue additional financing as appropriate and necessary to allow us to continue to implement the strategy.
Well, thank you so much for your knowledge and insight on this issue today. This has been Angie Draculich with BioPharm International with Mike Clayman of Flexion Therapeutics.
Thanks so much, Angie.